I'm going to turn now to Ken Medlock. He's an Energy and Resource Economics Fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute. So Ken, as I'm going to pick up with the last question I asked the mayor, I want to make it the first question here. Is this a case of ERCOT and it being not well run, and this was inevitable, and even a well-run ERCOT, the system was always going to break under a moment like this?
That's actually a great question, and unfortunately, I don't think there's actually a simple answer. In point of fact, ERCOT did a great job of avoiding that catastrophic failure. So that you mentioned at the outset of the program. So when you think about how they responded in the short term to the pressures that were placed on the grid, I think they did an admirable job. But when you look at resource adequacy and planning as we sort of rolled into this event, there were certainly things that could have been done much, much better. Unfortunately, it's not a simple answer. There's a lot of different things that failed miserably, and ultimately I think it's going to be incumbent upon not only ERCOT but state officials, elected officials, to figure out really what happened and avoid, the inevitable finger pointing and blame gaming that is going to go on, because it's already starting to emerge. I've been sort of offline for the last 4 days because I've been without power. We got our power back last night. Still don't have water. It's not fun. But at the same time, that means my access to information has been limited. So I'm kind of getting up to speed in real time. And in many ways, some of the images I'm seeing that you're showing here are the first time I've seen them.
I had an energy expert down in Austin say to me yesterday that look, the market, the energy market in Texas is remarkably efficient. In fact, incredibly efficient. But it was the equivalent of going to the grocery store and buying just one roll of toilet paper and hoping you don't get sick. And there was never any way to create capacity, no way to incentivize capacity. Is that a fair description?
It is a very fair description, actually. Texas is an energy-only market. And basically what that means is resources are added to the grid based on their competitiveness. It's actually been a hallmark for what's driven, in addition to the resources we have available in the state, for what's driven wind and solar to the heights that they are now at in Texas. But, lockstep with that, there's no incentive to develop backup capacity. And this doesn't mean an energy-only market doesn't work. And there's a lot of discussion now emerging about capacity markets and the role of regulators, et cetera, et cetera. But there have been efforts to, particularly after the 2011 event, February 10/11 should have been a wake-up call. It should have been an alarm that everybody saw. It wasn't as deep in terms of reaching down into Houston and South Texas. I mean, Houston saw 12 and 10-degree temperatures over the last couple of days. So 2011 was not that bad, but it still should have been a wake-up call. It should have been a warning shot across the bow saying, look, wind turbines are going to freeze at these incredibly low temperatures. You're going to have freeze-offs amongst compressor stations, wellheads, processing facilities on natural gas supplies. So that means you're going to be limited in that space as well. So what can we do if this were to be worse to avoid that kind of catastrophic event? And there were some recommendations made. And I think in 2013, roughly, there was a recommendation that came out to ERCOT about addressing concerns about limited backup capacity, addressing reserve margin issue. And really what it amounted to was intermittent resources being forced to purchase ancillary services on firm contracted supplies, and it was shot down. Now, importantly, ancillary services or those backup capacities can be paid for by anybody. It doesn't have to just be intermittent resources. But, that stuff hasn't happened, and there's no requirement for it to happen. And so we sit in a situation where, under normal circumstances, the grid works great. As a matter of fact, under a normal winter day, there wouldn't have been a problem even with the reduction in wind capacity, because you wouldn't have had the freeze-offs and there would have been sufficient gas capacity in effect to run. But that's not the case we have right now, because there is no spare capacity. And as was mentioned, we're not connected to the rest of the country. So that does create additional.
Well, and I was just going to say, considering that El Paso is basically fine, and El Paso is on the national grid, is that not a living, breathing example to the rest of Texas that says maybe we ought to suck it up, handle federal regulation, and join the national grid?
It should be. And, I've actually made these comments in the past. If we could connect, if Texas could actually connect to the rest of the grid, the wind resource in West Texas would be much more profitable, and it would actually promote more investment in capacity in the state because we could wield power west and east. Right now, we can't do it. So you end up in a really awkward situation where you're confined to being an island. You don't have anything really encouraging backup resources which act like storage effectively. They would be available at a moment's notice. And when the system goes down, you can't wheel in power, and you have no backup, and so you end up in a crisis like we're in right now.
Well, if I were a Texas resident, I'd be like, wait a minute, I don't know why I pay federal taxes and what the state is doing. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of that. But anyway, go ahead. I got to wrap up here. Go ahead, Mr. Medlock.
No worries. Yeah, there will be a lot of that, and I think there should be a lot of that, quite frankly. But at the end of the day, there were also things that generators in the state didn't necessarily do. Winterization, for example. So you mentioned El Paso. They actually took extreme steps to take care of that. In Beaumont County, they did the same thing, and those are two counties that really didn't experience any outages. So you sort of look around the state and you see that, wow, there could have been a lot done differently.
Yeah. Natural disasters are MRIs for governance. That's for sure. Ken Medlock, really appreciate your expertise. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Chuck.